Good evening, folks. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for joining. We're going to start in 1 minute.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ed Dominguez, the lead naturalist at the Seward Park Audubon Center, and you are joining me for a installment series that I call Naturalist Notebook. 4 or 5 times a year, I do a presentation on something that's happening in the natural world appropriate for that time of year that we are in, and share that with you. Pre-COVID, we used to do these live here at the center. But now, I think for the convenience of everyone and for safety, you can enjoy these from the comfort of your own home. And by the way, several people have contacted us here at the center saying that I signed up, registered, but something's come up. Can't make it from 6 to 7:30. No worries. Starting tomorrow morning, this program will be recorded on our YouTube channel at Seward Park Audubon Center, and you can look there, look it up, and watch this at your convenience whenever you would like. So it will be up there starting tomorrow morning. Another item of housekeeping, you may have questions. We will have a question and answer session at the end. Joey Manson, our center director, is here, and he will field those questions in the chat, and I will try to answer those as completely as I can. So I'd like to begin tonight by giving an acknowledgement to the original peoples who inhabited this area. In the Lushootseed language, they called themselves the Hatjuapish, the people of the lake. They were incredible naturalists, conservationists, and stewards. In fact, in a conversation I had with an anthropology professor at University of Washington, there are some Gary oak or Oregon white oak trees planted here in Seward Park that in all likelihood were originally planted and maintained for thousands of years by the Coast Salish peoples, the Hatjuapish. So they were the original stewards, and I want to say that we respect them, we pay homage to them, past, present, and future. They were the original conservationists of this place that we call home. Warblers in Washington is the title for tonight's topic. And I have a lot of information about this particular very intriguing and much loved group of birds. For many of you that are wondering what in the world's a warbler and why should I care about it? I've got lots of basic information for you. I also know that several people are viewing tonight who are experienced birders. So don't worry, I have some in-depth information that will feed your spirit about these birds and how to find them and what they're all about. So, annual visitors from the tropics. Let's begin. What is a warbler? Well, to back up just a bit, right now we are in the most exciting time of year for birders everywhere in North America. We are in the peak of migration season. Birds are coming up from the tropics up into our areas all around North America, the temperate forests, and even further north than us into the subarctic to court, breed, lay eggs, and raise their families. In fact, over King County last night, we had 87,800 birds come over King County from south to north as part of this migration. Almost 88,000 birds. And they peaked at about 12:10 a.m. So just after midnight last night, there was a lot of activity going over our heads while most of us were sleeping. And if you count back to March 1st until the present date, we have had 25,610,400 birds, almost 26 million, and they're still coming in, flying over our heads, some of them to breed here, others heading further north, some stopped in Oregon and they're going to breed down there. It is a tremendous time of year for movement by these birds. So this is the most exciting time of year for anyone that loves songbirds and migrating songbirds. And of those birds, the group that most people have the greatest reverence and love for are warblers. And why? Well, a warbler is a small migratory songbird. They're small, they're about 5 to 6 inches long is all. And they're unique in that they have yellow on most or some parts of their body. And we'll see tonight the various birds in the various regions of their bodies that are colored yellow. So they're bright. Nothing says spring as much as a warbler, and they are fascinating. Now, warblers, in addition to being yellow, all have some distinctive facial markings, like this common yellowthroat you see right here in front of us, with a black face, a bright yellow throat, and then a white band that extends above its eyes and goes completely around its crown. Warblers have legs that are either pink or dark. Some have wing bars, little white bars that crisscross the wings. We'll talk about those. And in addition to the yellow and the facial markings, all of these birds have a distinctive, cheery song that we refer to as a warbler, as is this common yellowthroat. So why are these birds so revered? Well, partly because of their beautiful color and this beautiful song. They have just brilliant springtime yellow coloration. Their songs are incredibly cheery and just a joy to listen to. Part of it is because of the long journey. As we'll see, many of them have come from South America, thousands of miles, and it's not a journey that any migratory bird takes lightly. They have to feed to build up their body reserves for the incredible amount of energy they have to expend. They never know along the way if they're going to find reliable food and water sources to refuel themselves. They may land in a pond that has toxic chemicals in it that poison them. They may be subject to predation. There's lots on their journey that can end up in them not meeting their goal of getting back to the breeding grounds where they were hatched. So there's an incredible epic drama to their journey. And I think one thing that makes warblers especially interesting is that they are not easy to spot. Even though they're bright yellow, these birds are very nervous, flitty-flighty, moving through the trees and understory shrubs, they are hard to spot. In fact, much of tonight we'll be talking about not only how to spot them, but how to bird by ear, to listen for their song. Because even though they may be hard to see, their songs are distinct and clear and are easy to hear. So we'll talk a lot about birding by ear and identification by bird song with these warblers. So the combination of physical beauty, the long distance journey they make, their beautiful song, and the fact that, well, how do we value anything? By its abundance or its scarcity. And these birds are hard to find. Even though they're around, their difficulty to find them and see them as they're in the trees makes them a much loved and much bird that is loved by all birders. So let's explore the world of all these warblers. First of all, I've talked about their migration. Where do they come from? Some birds come from Mexico, and many of our migratory birds come from Baja, which is on the left part of the Mexico screen there, the Gulf of California in between. Some come from Central America. And you notice that to the right, I have Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, included on the map because many North American warblers, vireos, tanagers are coming from those areas. However, most birds from those islands are heading up the East Coast. They cross the Gulf of Mexico or go right to Florida and head up the East Coast. Most of our migratory birds are coming up the main part of Mexico and Central America. And as I've alluded to, some journey from as far away as South America, Northern and Central South America. A flight of over 4,000 miles for a little 5-inch bird that eats mostly insects. It's an amazing feat just in terms of the physical, exertional, and the strength needed for these birds to do it. It's amazing. So they come from long distances. Here in Washington, we have 12 different species of warblers that we can identify. And I'm going to take you through each bird and talk about identifying characteristics and talk about where you can find them and talk about their songs, because birding by ear is a great way to find these birds. So if you're on the East Coast, you even have a greater diversity of warblers. So birders all along the central and the eastern part of North America have many more warblers. So it's just that more to learn, much more to learn. Here we have 12, and I think that's a good number for tonight. And this warbler we have here we're looking at is the Wilson's warbler. We'll talk more about him later. Let's move to our first of our warblers. And for those of you that are seasoned birders, I've grouped these into their genera groups. So the first group of warblers we're looking at are in the genus Cetophaga, which means basically bug eater. And all of these Cetophaga warblers have dark or black legs, as you can see, and then we'll move on to some other genera of warblers. But let's start with the bug eaters, the Cetophaga. The first one we have is the orange-crowned warbler. So take a look at the picture. Not a lot of identifying marks on the face on this one, despite the fact I said many warblers do have identifying facial features. Do notice that the eye has an eye ring. And by eye ring, we mean white that goes around the eye. Some of these birds will have a partial eye ring, maybe a little white at the top, a little white at the bottom. Some of them will have a complete eye ring with white all the way around. Some have no eye ring. But if you can get a glimpse of the bird, notice the eye as well as the facial features. Basically, this bird is drab for a warbler, kind of olive green to yellow, and it has blurry olive streaks on the breast going right down here in the yellow. You can see that in this picture. There's kind of faint olive drab streaks heading down from the throat on down. There's a little bit of white in the wings, dark legs, but this is kind of a basically drab green warbler. You might be thinking, Ed, crowned warbler, where's the orange crown? Well, this bird does have orange feathers that it can, as it's called, piloerect on the top of its head when it is flashing a territorial display to ward other males away or to help bring in the females. But most of the time, you don't see those the orange feathers at all on the top of this bird's head. So why name it for a physical feature that it rarely shows? Well, before there were days of modern optics like our binoculars and spotting scopes, I mean, the first optics that people used in the 19th century were opera glasses because they were magnifiers of a sort, not very good when you're out trying to look at wildlife. So how did people study birds? They shot them, unfortunately. They'd shoot the bird out of the tree or wherever they found it. And when you're looking at this bird on an examination table and you're combing through the feathers and you get to the head, guess what you find? Orange feathers in there. So many birds are named for physical features that aren't really visible when you see the bird out in the field, like the ring-necked duck or the red-bellied woodpecker. Field markings that are very difficult to see. Orange-crowned warbler, same thing. You very rarely see the orange crown. Just think of a basic olive green, somewhat yellow, but muted color bird with a white eye ring and dark legs. This warbler comes in April and May, so they've been coming in great numbers for the past 2 weeks in the area. I heard my first one about 10 days ago. They will be breeding next month, so they're arriving here. The males are setting up territories, finding a piece of terra firma, a patch of forest that they want to claim as theirs. For the orange-crowned warbler, that might be, a quarter of an acre, and they will advertise their claim to that territory by singing their beautiful song over and over and over as a message to other males that don't come over here. It's a very effective way to avoid actual physical conflict, which could cause injury and then perhaps death for the males. They just sing and establish their territories through vocalizations. And also they bring in the females that way. They'll be breeding in June, and the vocalization of this bird is a fast trill. Now, a trill means two pitches that alternate rapidly. When I play these recordings I have for you, most of these birds will have 3 vocalizations. So you can hear it, there'll be a little pause of space, you can hear it again, another pause of space, and then you can hear it again. I like to think of this bird as if you have a comb, a plastic comb, and you ran your thumb down the teeth of the comb and it makes a that's kind of the sound and the mnemonic that I use when I teach people about the orange-crowned warbler. So let's give a listen. Hear how it rises at the, and then falls off at the end. Has a lot of tone, a lot of musical quality to it. So that's the orange-crowned warbler. Now, our resident bird, the dark-eyed junco, a sparrow, also makes a trill, but it doesn't have nearly the musical effect that this bird has. Let's listen to it one more time. Where can you expect to hear these birds? Orange-crowned warblers like deciduous trees. In our area, they love English hawthorns or common hawthorns. They love our native black hawthorns. They love alders. They love willows. They love beaked hazelnuts, shrubs. So they're in big shrubs and deciduous trees. You can find them in conifers, but they particularly, as in this example, it's on a conifer, but in our area, they really migrate to deciduous trees. Why? Because deciduous tree leaves, say a vine maple, are having a lot of aphids right now. And these birds are insect eaters, protein eaters. So they go all through the leaves of trees, picking off aphids, scale insects, white flies, eggs of any insect or spider that might be laid, any larvae from eggs that might have hatched, little tiny green caterpillars. These warblers are grooming the trees and picking those off for their meal. And the deciduous broadleaf trees have more of an abundance of these. So that's where you can find orange-crowned warblers. So the orange-crowned, a warbler that is in abundance in our area right now. All right, the Nashville warbler, another Cetophaga warbler, has dark legs. Take a look at his body. He's a much brighter yellow than the orange-crowned warbler. And take a look at his head in particular. It's gray, comes down over the eye and around back to the nape of the neck, but the throat has the bright yellow of the rest of its body. We'll see another warbler coming up, the McGilvery's, that looks similar, but has the gray coming down completely over the throat. Also notice the eye ring, a complete white round eye ring. So if you just get a glimpse of this bird, see if you can catch first the gray head and then that complete white eye ring, a narrow little beak like all these warblers do that are perfect for picking out those eggs, little worm larvae, insects, and spiders. This bird arrives also in April and May, breeds right now in the month of May, and I just saw several of these. I was over in the Methow Valley, Winthrop and Mazama. They really like to be a little bit east of the Cascades, but people have been seeing them around here too. Where do you find these birds? They also like deciduous trees, and they also like kind of dry, scrubby areas. So if you have kind of a meadow that's fairly dry with a lot of dry shrubs around it, great spot for these warblers. So they can be away from water, not necessarily close to water, but liking deciduous trees and shrubs. Now this bird's song is quite distinctive. It's two parts, and my mnemonic is cheepa, 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 and then a very rapid trill, t, 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 t. We call these phrases. In bird songs, most songs are made up of phrases, a group of notes that seem to make sense together. Some people phrase is a new term for them. So think of a song that you're familiar with. How about Somewhere Over the Rainbow? Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. That's a phrase, a complete group of notes that's one idea. There's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. That's another phrase. Birds sing in phrases. So cheepa, 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 t, 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 t. Two groups of notes. We say this bird is a two-part or two-phrased note. Let's have a listen. Two distinct parts. Cheep, 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 cheepa, t, 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 t. And those two parts are very distinctive in the field. Now, you might notice in this photo, Nashville warblers actually have a little bit of a chestnut feathering on the top of their head that they can erect, kind of like the orange-crowned warbler does, but this tends to be more visible in the Nashville than the orange-crowned warbler does. So when you see this warbler flitting around, if you see the gray head, the white eye ring, you might notice a little bit of chestnut red on the top, and that'll give you your diagnosis for you have a Nashville warbler. Cheepa, 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 t, 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 t. Two parts. The yellow warbler, one of our classic warblers that is yellow all over its entire body. And it's a very bright yellow. The males have these red streaks that you can see. Females have a more muted streaking, and they just look more like a little lemon flitting around in the branches of a tree. This warbler is singing his song at the top of his lungs from a branch of a tree with the red streaking. Dark legs, dark eyes, no facial markings to speak of really, just yellow all over. They're arriving right now. They're not quite early April arrivees, but they come in May and they start breeding right away. So they don't take much time to get their territory established, find mates, and go to work making the next brood of yellow warblers to carry on their lineage, their progeny. This bird, like all warblers, has this beautiful chirpy musical sound, and the mnemonic we like to use as birders, he says, sweet, 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 I'm so sweet. Sweet, 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 I'm so sweet. And the song has a lot of projection. It's quite loud. I think he gives us one. There it is. So the yellow warbler, all yellow, males have red streaks, and they go around crowing about how sweet they are. And most of us bird lovers agree with that. They are sweet. The yellow warbler. Now, moving from the yellow warbler to the yellow-rumped warbler. And if you're new to birding, you might think, oh my gosh, how can you tell yellow-rumped? What's the difference? But there are differences. Just take a casual look at the bird in this image. Instead of being yellow all over, it has yellow highlights, and its body has kind of a beautiful gray, almost a shimmery blue to it. There's some white in the wings, dark legs, and take a look where the yellow is. There is yellow on the rump. Right above the tail, you can see a yellow patch. It has yellow on its flanks. See right under the wings, there's a bright yellow patch. There's yellow on top of its head. In fact, its species means crowned, like it's wearing a little yellow crown. And then it has yellow on the throat. How about the eye rings? We've talked about eye rings, partial and full. This one has an eye ring that's not a complete circle, but it's quite prominent above and below, enough that you notice it. Now, in the yellow-rumped warbler, there are two races or two subspecies. One is called the Audubons, named after John James Audubon, who our Audubon Center is named after. The Audubon's yellow-rumped warbler has the yellow throat you see here. There's another population called the Myrtle's yellow-rumped warbler, and the throat is white rather than yellow. Now, the Myrtle yellow-rumped warblers tend to move a little further north. Yellow-rumped warblers will breed right here in our area in Seattle. Most of the myrtles go farther north into the Skagit Valley and up into British Columbia, but many of them are passing through now. Other than the throat, they're very, very similar. And so if you get yellow-rumped warbler, great. If you get a good look at the throat and it looks white, you've got a myrtle. If it looks yellow, you've got the Audubons. They arrive early. They start coming in late March. Here I started hearing at Seward Park, yellow-rumped warblers was about the second week of April. So they are breeding right now. And this bird is interesting because all these other warblers head south in August, and by September, most of them are gone. But many yellow-rumped warblers, for whatever reason, overwinter in their breeding areas. So I've had 2 yellow-rumped warblers that have hung around my backyard feeders all winter long. Why? We're not sure. Maybe the birds recognize that they don't have the strength this particular season to make the journey back. Maybe they've got an illness where they feel that it's just too hazardous for them. And when they find your backyard that has suet or birdseed, they'll take advantage of that and keep themselves going because there's not as many insects here in the winter as we have in the summer. So backyard feeders do a great service for some of these warblers that decide to stick around. But don't be concerned. It's not your feeder that is keeping them here against their natural instinct to head south. It's something else that causes them to overwinter. And we just don't know what that is. Now, the vocalization of this bird, it's a 2-parter, but it's not a dramatic 2-parter. And the best I can come up with is seedle, 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 and then a little bit longer second phrase, seedle, seedle. When I was a kid, we used to have a little wooden dowel as a toy, and it was on a string, and you could whirl it above your head, and it went zip, 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 zip. For me, that little toy, and they don't even know if they make those anymore, but that toy is a great mnemonic because this bird's vocalization is quite so similar to these little wooden toys we had. Let's take a listen. Okay, not a tremendous amount of difference, but once you get that sound in your ear, it is distinctive. Let's listen one more time. The yellow-rumped warbler. Imagine twirling that little whistling. Well, have a good laugh. Us birders, in order to make sense of all these different sounds that we hear, have some pretty funny mnemonics, and there's more funny ones to come. But you know what? They work. And so if they work for you, take them. If not, feel free to come up with your own mnemonic for remembering some of these sounds. But our brain is more effective at learning when there's humor involved. So I'm happy to do some goofy, crazy things to help us learn these beautiful little jewels. Now, let's move on to the black-throated gray warbler. This bird arrived in April, I don't know, about the same time that, just a little bit after the yellow-rumped warblers were coming in. The black-throated gray came in both to my neighborhood and the Madrona neighborhood of Seattle and in Seward Park. Now, when you first get a look at this bird, it's kind of zebra-like, isn't it? It's kind of black and white with gray. So basically not a lot of yellow on this bird, kind of black and white stripes. But take a look right in front of the eye, and you can see each eye has a very, very bright little yellow patch. And this bird is one that sometimes will sit still long enough that you can actually get a look at it. So if you see sort of this little black and white bird flitting around through the trees, first thing you want to hone in on, is there a little yellow patch in front of the eye? And if there is, you have the black-throated gray warbler. Males have the black throat. You can see the black lower throat here. Females' throat are white all the way down. But many times their head is bent down low like this, so you may not see it. But the black and white markings on the head, the black through the eye, the bright white eyebrow, and then the dark crown are good indicators, as well as the overall zebra kind of look of this bird. As I mentioned, this bird arrives in April, and they are breeding right now. What kinds of habitats can you find them in? Black-throated grays, like it's in a Douglas fir, you can see here, like Douglas fir. They also like some of the deciduous understory trees and shrubs we have here. Vine maples, beaked hazelnuts, willows, big leaf maples is the big trees, big deciduous trees. You can also find them in alders and madronas, moving about. Doing what all these warblers are doing. You can see this one here's got a little insect in its beak. They're gleaning the tree of any eggs, larvae, and insects or spiders that happen to be there, as well as any other invertebrate they find. Now, here's a funny mnemonic for this bird's vocalization. He says, "Eats, eats, eats a pizza, pizza." Sometimes he only puts one pizza in, sometimes two, but it's a first phrase that's two rapid syllables, daga, 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 da, and then two longer phrases, da, 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 da. Let's take a listen. That time he just had one pizza. And the last syllable rises in pitch, pizza. So it goes from low to high, which is pretty indicative, diagnostic for the black-throated gray warbler. Let's give him one more listen. Eats a, eats a, eats a pizza. The black-throated gray warbler. Now, the next warbler I'm going to introduce you to, the Townsends warbler, song is very similar. Most warblers are distinctive enough that you can learn the songs, but a couple like the black-throated gray and this bird, the Townsends warbler, are very similar. So it might take a little bit of skill and practice and patience to learn the difference between the two, but I've got a couple tips that will help you. First of all, there's no difference in if you see the bird. This bird is not just a black, gray, and white zebra-looking bird. Look at the face of this guy. He's got yellow and black. In fact, I call it a black mask. He's got black that goes around the eyes, and the yellow borders that black mask, as well as black on the crown and black on the throat, and yellow that tapers down along the upper throat, upper breast, and along the flanks. Its wings have a couple of conspicuous white wing bars, as you can see, and then the back part of the bird is more of a gray and white. but that face is very distinctive. Now, this bird has just been arriving for about a week now. I've heard them in Seward Park, and they breed in June. This bird likes conifers in particular. So you can see here he's pulling off a little seed pod off a deciduous plant, but these birds like to head up as the snow melts up into the high country. So I say breeds in June because they're hanging around down here, but many of them are going to move up into the Cascades and follow the melting snow line, and you'll be able to find these birds up at Snoqualmie Pass and Stevens Pass in the summertime. They really like conifers. So you'll hear their vocalization and you'll see them sitting on top of a Douglas fir or maybe a Pacific silver fir, or maybe if you go east of the Cascades and an Engelmann spruce or a Western larch singing their song. Very similar to the black-throated gray in that it's a buzzy. Instead of saying sort of eats a pizza, it kind of goes zeedle, 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 and then its second phrase are two notes that go up in pitch. Zeet, zeet. Let's take a listen. Rapid tempo in those last two. Zeet, zeet. Let's take one more listen to that. The Townsends warbler. Named for John Kirk Townsend, who was a botanist physician down at Fort Vancouver in the 19th century. So the black masked bird, the Townsend's warbler, they are singing all around our area now. And if you miss them now, if you're going out camping or hiking this summer, listen for them up in the high country and then see if you can see them sitting on top of a conifer tree delivering their song. The Townsend's warbler. Now, the Townsend's warbler regionally is in our area and goes into the north. South of us, down, say, around from Mount Rainier to Mount St. Helens, south Columbia River into Oregon, there's another warbler that's similar called the Hermit warbler. Bird looks very, very different, but has another similar song. So the black-throated gray, the Townsends, and the Hermit are very similar in their vocalizations. Hermit warbler has a complete yellow face and crown. So all yellow, no black mask at all. The body of the bird is basically kind of gray, black, drab, but has a very beautiful white belly and breast. No streaking at all on the breast. So if you're down in the Mount Rainier area, Mount St. Helens, down in the Cascades of that area, or out towards the coast, you might see this bird with the yellow face, white down the breast with no streaks at all, no eye ring of any kind, one little white wing bar, and black legs. This bird arrives in that area in May, arriving right now, and like the Townsend's warbler, tends to wait until June, and many times will head up to the high country. So you can find hermit warblers up around Paradise, Sunrise, to spots on Mount Rainier, on Mount St. Helens, over at Mount Adams, and on the high ridges of the Cascades as they head down into Oregon. In fact, where these two, the Townsends and the Hermit, come together as a species, they can interbreed. So sometimes you get some hybrids. Let's listen to the sound of the Hermit warbler. Z, 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 sitiu. Sitiu. That sitiu is real distinctive. Has a little bit of a clearer tone quality than the Townsends as well. But these three birds, these three warblers, are quite similar. So I understand totally if you're new to birding by ear, you're hearing these sounds and you're thinking, they all sound the same to me. Believe me, there was a time when I could not tell the difference either. So what's a person to do? I've got some resources at the end of this presentation that I will recommend to you if you want to get good at learning birdsong, in particular warblers. Secondly, go out with someone who really knows their bird songs. and feel free to ask them questions over and over and over. Is that what I'm hearing here? Is that what I'm hearing here? Believe me, many master birders, when I was young and growing up, had endless patience with me as I would continue to ask questions. Is that a Townsend's warbler? I think it is. Or is that a black-throated gray? And they were always more than generous with sharing their knowledge. So find someone, join me here at Seward Park Audubon on many of my bird walks. I will be happy to help guide you through this. It's not quite as arcane or abstruse as it sounds. All right, so here's what I'd like to do, just to do a quick recap of these three warblers. I'm going to do the vocalizations of each of them. Here's the black-throated gray that eats a pizza. Only one pizza that time. Must not have been as hungry. Okay, the Townsends, zeal, 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 zeet, zeet. Two rapid note ascending notes. And the Hermit. Sitiu, almost 3 syllables on that last note. And again, some of this is for my more advanced viewers this evening that are into warblers and want to know them. Don't feel bad if you're new to them and it's like, wow, it seems like it's something I could never manage. You can do it, and I will give you some resources at the end of this program to help you. All right, those are 3 warblers that are a little bit challenging. Let's go to some ones that are a little bit easier to get the sound of. The American Redstart. Now, this is a unique warbler in that it looks like a Halloween bird. Instead of having yellow on it, it's a warbler that is orange and black. The female is gray with yellow on her body, yellow patches rather than orange. And I've got a picture of her coming up, but the males are this beautiful black with orange on their wings and on their tail and on the sides. This bird arrives May and June, so it tends to come a little later. It's a June breeder like the Townsends and Hermit warblers, and Redstarts can be found in wet forested areas, particularly deciduous forests. So if you're along the banks of a river with lots of willows, lots of slide alder or water birch, that's a good place to look and listen for this bird because they like to be close to water and they like it pretty densely forested with trees and understory shrubs. They love willows. Now this bird, tita, 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 suio. It kind of has 3 phrases, tita, 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 the first phrase, and then some rapid c, 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 c. And for the second phrase and the final phrase is a suio. So rather than listen to me, let's listen to the bird. So again, you'll hear this bird along the banks of a river, in wet areas where there's some standing water on the ground, near boggy areas, or along the shores of lakes, in the deciduous trees and shrubs that are along the water courses. That's the place to listen for this bird. All right, now we move into a different genus of birds. The Wilson's warbler is in the Candelaria, which means basically little goldfinch, because it does kind of look like a goldfinch. So the Candelaria or the Wilson's warbler, like the yellow warbler we saw earlier, this bird's entire body is yellow, and it's a beautiful bright yellow. But unlike the yellow warbler, look at the top of the bird's head. It's got a very distinctive glossy black cap that's unmistakable. The legs of the Wilson's warbler aren't dark, they're pink, There's a little bit of gray in the wings. So the wing, as you see the bird in a tree, like in this Japanese maple, have a little bit of a gray look, but the overall gestalt of the bird, when you see it, is it's a bright yellow lemon with a black cap on top. It's arrived, it started coming in here about 2 weeks ago, first part of May, actually late April this year. It's breeding right now. And this bird's vocalization is distinctive. I tend to think of, imagine a Cessna airplane, coming in for a landing, and it's a hard landing. So it kind of comes in with bump, 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 and smooths out and lands. The notes are very rapid, very staccato, meaning they're short and separated. Visualize a small plane making a rough landing. You'll find this bird in deciduous trees as well as conifers, likes them both. It's going wherever it finds aphids or whiteflies or any little insect, sucking insect. This bird will be picking them off by the dozens and eating them. So these birds actually do the trees a big favor, help ridding them of insect pests and using those insects as protein to fuel themselves. Let's listen to this one more time, as it is a warbler that you are going to hear all over Seattle right now. Very sharp, very staccato. The Wilson's Warbler, a bright little lemon with a glossy black cap. Now we move on to the McGillivray's Warbler. The McGillivray's Warbler also has pink legs, but look at that gray head. And we looked at the Nashville Warbler earlier that had a gray head with a bright white eye ring, but the Nashville Warbler's throat was yellow. The McGillivray's hood gray comes completely down like Batman's cowl, comes clear down over the upper throat, the lower throat onto the upper breast. The eye ring isn't a complete white eye ring. You can see there's white above, white on the bottom, but it's a bright enough white that if you get a good look at it, it will stand out, it will pop to you. They're arriving right about now. There are a lot of McGillivray's warblers east of the Cascade Crest. So if you're in the Yakima Canyon, Ellensburg, Wenatchee, Kashmir, Leavenworth area are great places for McGillivray's. The Methow Valley is a good place for McGillivray's. I was just in the Methow last week and the McGillivray's hadn't quite arrived yet. There were Nashville warblers everywhere, yellow warblers, yellow-rumped warblers, but no McGillivray's yet. But that was last week. It could be this week they are dropping in. This bird breeds in June. It likes woodsy areas. Many times it likes to be a little close to some water, like even a creeklet, a rivulet, or a river or a lake. It likes to be close to water, whereas the Nashville warbler that has the gray hood with the yellow throat can be in drier, brushier areas. McGillivray's tends to be in our area, likes to be around water. This bird has a two-part or two-phrased vocalization, chittle, 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 and then the second phrase is turtle, turtle. Let's listen. Can you hear the two different phrases? In the second phrase. Second phrase. Chittle, 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 turtle, turtle, turtle. And they vary the number of turtle, turtle, turtles that they throw in for their last phrase. Let's listen to that guy one more time. The McGillivray's Warbler. Definitely two different phrases, two different parts. So if you're east of the Cascade Crest, say in the Yakima Canyon or Leavenworth or the Methow Valley, you're by water, say you're in Leavenworth and you're by the Wenatchee River flowing through, and you hear a bird making a two-part sound like this, think this is McGilvery's warbler territory. Very likely I'll encounter this bird and you hear that chittle, 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 turtle, turtle, turtle. Then you know you've got a McGilvery's, even if you don't get a chance to espy the yellow body with the gray head and the partial white eye ring. The common yellowthroat, which we saw earlier on in one of our opening slides, a very distinctive face. It's got black right through the eyes, a white brow that goes right around, and then a brilliant yellow throat, kind of a brown on the back, which is a little bit unusual. It's not an olive green or drab or gray, black and white like other warblers. It's brown on the back. And notice that there's a light wash of yellow on the rump and on the base of the tail. This bird is an April arriver, breeds in May and in June, frequently likes to have areas that have water. If you're here in the Seattle area, a great place to hear yellowthroats. If you go to the Union Bay Natural Area up by the University of Washington, also called the Montlake Fill, you get lots of yellowthroats there. Now, this bird's vocalization is very easy to recognize. It says witchity, witchity, witchity. Only has one phrase, witchity, 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 and it sings it over and over and over. Let's listen. Hard to mistake that for any other bird. Witchity, 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 witchity. The common yellowthroat. Let's give, there he is. Likes to have wet areas. The Montlake Fill, Union Bay Natural Area is a great place to find and listen to these guys. Occasionally I hear them here at Seward Park. Not that often. If you go over to Mercer Island, the Mercer Slough area is another good place to spot these birds. They like to be by water. And frequently they're a bird that will sit somewhat still and pose while they're singing. So you'll get a beautiful view of that distinctive face. All right, have one more warbler to share with you. This one is in its own genus called Ictera, and it is a large bird. In fact, it's larger than other warblers. This bird is almost robin-sized. And take a look at its body morphology. Not only is it larger, but it's got a much thicker, heavier bill rather than the thin little insect-eating bill of the other warblers. So this bird is good at cracking open nuts. It's got a lot of gray dark on the head and back, wings, a brown tail, but the throat and the belly are as yellow can be. When you see this bird in the field, it is a striking bright yellow. My photograph here doesn't even do it justice. It has white blotches on the face. It has, we call them like spectacles. It's almost like it's got white glasses that it's wearing, and a little white right down at the base of the gape of the jaw, of the mouth and the jaw. This bird is a May arrivee, so it's coming in right now. Breeds in June, so they arrive in May. They take a few weeks to establish their territory, call in the females, and then they get down to business in June. Now, this bird is called yellow-breasted, obviously, but it's called a chat because this bird is quite the vocalist. It makes a whole series of phrases, many of which are not related to one another at all. It's got whistles, it's got clucks, it's got hoots, it mimics other birds. It does the three stooges, nyuk, 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 nyuk. Let's take a listen. This bird has a lot to say and everything is different. All from the same bird. So chats like moist areas, frequently can find them near rivers or waterways, in the shrubbery or the trees. But boy, you'll hear this cacophony of sound and you'll be thinking, what in the world is making all, is this more than one bird? Is it one bird possibly making all of this racket? If you get that feeling and you're out looking for birds, you have the yellow-breasted chat. Let's give him one more listen. say this bird has a varied vocabulary is an understatement. Well, we've gone through 12 different warblers that we find here in Washington State. And if you're like, I'm saturated, I can't take anymore, boy, be glad you're not on the East Coast, because there's way more warblers than that to figure out. Here we have it relatively easy. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about, here we've got another view of our chat about experiencing warblers. You may have noticed that I've got my text all with a background of this bright, yellow green, and not just because we all love the Sounders here in Seattle. We do, we love their Sounders soccer, but this is the color that you typically find warblers in, this bright yellow green backdrop of leaves on deciduous trees and shrubs that are coming out now are typically what you see these yellow birds in and amongst. So when you look at the bird by itself, you think, geez, that yellow, it ought to stand out like a sore thumb. You get these yellow birds into this yellow-green deciduous tree cover, and they become invisible. It's just amazing. They blend right in with it, and the fact that they're moving around a lot makes it even more difficult. However, let's talk about some ways that you can get out and experience warblers, particularly if you're new to birding. These are an intriguing group of birds, hard to find. They come from a long distance, and they're beautiful. Let's talk about how you can enjoy them. As I mentioned, they are constantly moving, and they rarely sit still, so you can get a glimpse of them. They're on the move, gleaning the insects and eggs, as I spoke of, but they're always concerned that something is out to eat them. For example, our Cooper's hawks or our sharp-shinned hawks, which are bird eaters, and particularly they love songbirds. They'll pick them out of the air, or if the bird pauses on a branch, they'll snatch them off the branch. So by staying in motion, you're giving any predator a moving target and not presenting yourself as a stationary, easy prey target threat. So what I do when I'm out birding, walking through habitat, shrubs, trees, or by a river or lake, relax your vision and just look for movement. Sometimes it might just be the wind fluttering willow leaves, but more often than not, it may be one of these warblers darting to and fro. So watch for quick, twitchy, short bursts of flight from a bird flying from point A to point B, or point A snatching an insect and going to a limb or a branch, and then moving again very quickly. So just relax your eyes and look for movement. Have your binoculars ready. Many times you just get your binoculars up and the bird has moved on. So try to get yourself in a position where you can see the bird with your naked eyes and then track it. You might get lucky and they'll sit still for a moment or two, and that's when quickly get your binoculars up, rotate your center focus wheel, and see if you can pull in, looking for those field markings that we talked about earlier. Markings on the face, eye rings, and then, of course, the sound. We talked about how they blend in with deciduous foliage. It's just amazing. They disappear in it. But look for those facial markings, eye ring or no eye ring or partial eye ring. We talked about how many have the dark legs, some have pink legs. Sometimes the legs are tough to see, but you might get a good look. They forage, we talked about, amidst trees and shrubs. They don't come out in the open very often because that would make them an easy target for a predatory bird. But if you're patient, observing warblers is very rewarding. As I said, how do we value things? Based on abundance or scarcity. And because warblers are hard to see, once you do see them, you get a great aha feeling. And brain science now confirms when you recognize and experience a bird, you get a little shot of endorphins in your brain. So the more warblers you can see, the more warblers you recognize, you're just getting constant little serotonin and dopamine little shots to your brain. So you feel better and you feel great about birds, and then you'll want to do things to help take care of them in their habitat. So it's all good. Each warbler species has a distinctive song, as we talked about. Try to learn the songs and the warblers in your area. So you don't have to learn all 12 of them, but if you're right here in Seattle right now, maybe concentrate on the Yellowrumped warbler, which is singing everywhere, and the Wilson's warbler, like the airplane making a rough landing. Those are two good warblers that have distinctive sounds and they're great to start off with. As you get those down, add another warbler or two, or go to a different habitat. Go to the Union Bay Natural Area and see if you can hear a witchity, 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 witchity of the common yellowthroat. Warblers are here with us for a limited amount of time. One of the reasons why they're so beloved by birders in North America. They fly up from the tropics, they spend 2.5 months with us, and by August, the songs have diminished. Remember, songs are males' way of demarcating their territory and calling the females in. The bird that has the most robust, strong song with the greatest number of variations, it's been shown, attracts the greatest number of females. And from the females' point of view, in the social hierarchy, the males with the more robust song with the greater variations have a higher rung on the social hierarchy ladder than do birds that don't have as robust a song. By the time we get to Labor Day, warblers are leaving our area, heading back on their fall migration. Why head back? Well, the birds come up here to take advantage of the abundance of insects. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you go out, particularly in morning or evening, and look up, there's all kinds of gnats and midges and mosquitoes all around in the air. And these are food for these birds. As we move into fall, our insect populations start to decline. In the tropics, where these birds are from, Central America, Mexico, South America, there's a greater supply of insects year-round that sustain them. Not in the abundance that we have here, which is why they make that arduous and dangerous journey of thousands of miles to come up here. But as our insect population starts to taper off, most of them decide it's time to head back to the tropics, where it's not quite the explosion of insects, but there's enough that we can make it through the winter, and then come back again next spring. Viewing warblers requires much looking up like this, seeing from below in the tops of trees. To avoid what birders call warbler neck, where your neck and your trapezius muscles back in your upper shoulders feel like you need to visit a massage therapist, take frequent breaks in your viewing. Relax your neck. Rotate your shoulder muscles, your trapezius muscles, and give yourself a little bit of a break, because it's a lot of looking up, but it's very rewarding. American Redstart female, I promised I'd show this to you. This was the male version was the Halloween bird, black with orange. The female has the more characteristic yellow on the tail, on the wings, and under the wings on her flanks. Where the male is red, or orange rather, with black, the female is more gray-brown with the yellow and a beautiful blue head. In my thinking, she's just as strikingly beautiful as the male. Now, if I've kind of whetted your appetite about warblers and you're interested in learning more, some sources I recommend. There's a great app by Princeton University Press. It's called The Warbler Guide. You can just look up thewarblerguide.com. I have that app on my phone. It's great. It has all the warblers by region of North America. You can select here, the Northwest. It'll winnow out the birds of the East Coast that you don't need to learn about right now, but you can certainly click it if you want to. Gives those warblers, talks a bit about their history, has views from below, like if you're looking up in a tree, from the side, from above, gives you details that I'm not going to go into here about, like, is the top part of the beak dark and the under part of the beak more pale or yellow? Gives you lots of information, as much as you could want. Plus it has all the recordings. Of course, the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, all about birds, and their accompanying app, Merlin as it's called, is a great resource. You can have it right on your phone. You know, back in the old day when I was learning these songs, you had a cassette tape recorder and you had to click rewind, and hopefully you were watching the little counter dial so you stopped it at the right spot. Otherwise you had to go back and forth. Now everything's on your app and you just hit the button and you can hear it. And with Merlin, if you don't know what the bird is, you can hit the button, aim your phone at the bird, and it'll tell you what bird song you're hearing. So, wow. The resources we have nowadays are just great if you're just getting into birding. National Audubon, of which our Seward Park Audubon Center is a part of, has a great guide to North American birds, both an app and a book. They're both great. And then particularly for bird songs, there's an app called Larkwire, one word, that has a game where it picks 4 birds that occupy a similar habitat, say a meadow or a forest or a grassland, and it plays the recordings in the form of a game. And if you get it right, you get a wing flap. And if you get it wrong, a bird's foot comes down and smashes you. And you can try it again until you get it right. So some good resources if you're interested in learning more about warblers. And then if you find someone that is good with these birds and knows their songs, try to get out with them as much as you can and glean all that information from them. Everybody I know that's a birder is more than happy to share what we know, because that's what keeps the bird nation strong and healthy, is human beings looking out for habitat and conservation of these birds, because without the habitat, they're not going to be around. So learning about them and taking care of them is where it's all about with us. As Joey Manson, our center director, likes to say, people take care of what they love and they love what they know. So start with the knowledge. You start to develop an affinity and a caring, and then you think, boy, these creatures mean a lot to me. What can I do in my day-to-day life that will help them have a place to live and grow and survive and perpetuate their species? Anyway, thank you very much for viewing our warblers. I hope if you're new to birding, this gave you a good introduction to these incredible birds that are so popular with everyone in North America. If you're a seasoned birder, hopefully I had some tips for you, a little more advanced, that will help you as you're out exploring. And please, if it seemed like there was a lot and it was overwhelming, don't be put off. There are lots of resources, and the more you learn, the better you feel in brain chemistry, and the more you enjoy these birds. So thank you very much for joining us. We have our chat room open. I'm going to put off my screen sharing so that I can see what our questions are. And if you have a question, Joey will be manning the chat room. If I can get this to click here. There we go. And I'll be happy to field some questions if I can. So if you have some, I think Joy will read them off to me and I will see what I can do.
Great, Ed. Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. A great opportunity to learn about these birds that are, as you mentioned, so many of them are flying to our area right now. And so there are some questions in the chat. Please add more if you want to, get your question responded to by Ed. Ed, if you take a drink of water, I'm going to go ahead and start reading some of these. The first one is really a comment. And Carolyn just wanted to share that just as you started talking about the Wilson's Warbler, one of them popped out into your bird bath for the first time. So what a wonderful treat.
I'd like to say I planned it that way, but no, that's great though.
Okay, so Debbie wants to know about a warbler that doesn't exist on the West Coast, but the black and white warbler, does it have any yellow?
Debbie, I'm not an expert on East Coast warblers because I've only been to the East Coast maybe twice in my life. So I don't know. That's something I could look up, but if you check any of the resources I mentioned, I think the black and white warbler is just black and white, but I don't want to say definitively because I don't know my East Coast warblers as well as I do my West Coast. So sorry for a kind of a squishy answer there, but I think yes, but I'm not totally sure on that. Okay.
Damadina wants to talk about the Yellowrumped warblers just a little bit. She noticed in a flock. Is that generally true of all warblers, that they flock?
When they migrate, yes, they tend to stay in groups for safety, not only in terms for safety in numbers, but also navigation. And that's a whole different aspect of migration that we didn't have time to touch on tonight, but birds use the stars, they use celestial light, they use Earth's magnetic fields, they use barometric pressures, they use a variety of ways to help them make that journey of 4,000 or even longer miles. And so by staying in a group, you're more likely to have others checking and honing into the same guiding principles that take them from south to north than if you go off on your own. Plus the fact that there's safety in numbers rather than being a lone individual that might be picked off by a predator. So they do flock when they land in an area, like say they're on their way north. Let's take a warbler that the black-throated gray warbler that tends to breed more northerly in British Columbia. They will come into our area in big numbers and flocks. They'll hit the forest area, say here of Seward Park or maybe your neighborhood, and they will be all around the trees, communicating with one another, staying in touch with short little, not songs, but little chip calls that are kind of like that, and feeding on insects, kind of getting their food stores replenished and revitalized. Then many of them, when they take the next leg of their journey and go farther north, like say they leave here and go up to Ferndale or Bellingham, they'll tend to fly in groups. So yes, they travel in groups, they'll be in flocks, and once they've established a territory, the male will stay in that area, he'll call females in, and then the two of them will settle down to raising a new brood of youngsters. And then when they fly back in the fall, it's much less organized. Some birds will fly back on the fall migration in groups, but smaller groups typically, and not in the big masses that we see coming through with the spring migration. So the answer is yes, until it's time for them to get down to the business of raising a new family. Then instead of being in groups, they just pair up and they stay with their mate, raising their young birds. And the birds next year will fly back to the area where they were hatched. So they have kind of a homing instinct to return to the area of their birth and then raise the new generation of their species from that location.
Great, thank you, Ed. So I'm going to combine a couple questions here. What warblers can be seen in Seward Park? And if there was somebody's in Seattle, where should they go if they want to see more warblers?
In Seward Park right now, Wilson's warblers are singing up a storm. We have there's another group of migratory birds that are called vireos. Vireo just basically means green. I'm green. They don't have the yellow that warblers have. They tend to be more of a green, olive drab birds. There are lots of vireos singing, but in terms of warblers right now in the park, we have Townsends warblers that are here. Remember, the Townsends warblers are birds that are going to breed up into the mountains. So they'll be heading as the snow melts. Might be a late year for them this year because we keep getting snow in the mountains. It hasn't retreated. The snow line hasn't retreated as much as it has in normal years, but they'll be heading up to Snoqualmie Pass, Stevens Pass, all along the Cascade Crest to breed. But right now, Townsend's warblers, the zeedle, 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 zeet, zeet bird is here. So we've got Wilson's, we've got Townsend's, we have black-throated grays that are here that haven't continued their next leg up into British Columbia. Yellowrumped warblers are here in the park. And have I heard any others? Nope, that comprises the ones that we can hear in the park right now. Common yellowthroats and maybe even a yellow-breasted chat. I mentioned the Union Bay Natural Area, known as the Montlake Fill, because it used to be a garbage dump until the 60s. Then they completely revegetated that landscape and made it very environmental and bird friendly, and it's a great birding spot. Mercer's Slough is another good spot where you can see and hear warblers. And if you have a chance to go east of the Cascade Crest, the areas I mentioned, Leavenworth along the Wenatchee River, Cashmere, Wenatchee, Ellensburg, where the Yakima River flows down, or through Yakima Canyon. In fact, a bunch of birders, I think a lot of Audubon people are having a big camp out this month. It's what's called Weenus Creek, which is up out of the Yakima Canyon. It's kind of an upland that's got all kinds of bird species coming through. You get many birds there on the east side of the Cascade Crest that are a little harder to find here on the west. Those would be American Redstarts, McGilvery's warblers, Nashville warblers, as well as a variety of vireos and thrushes over there. But in Seward Park right now, you can reliably get 4 different species of warblers singing, and in the neighborhoods as well. They're all here right now, either fueling up to head a little further north, fueling up, waiting to head up into the mountains to breed, or stopping right here and saying, you know, this is where we were hatched. Let's find a good mate and let's get the business of nest building underway.
Great, thank you, Ed. So Margaret wants to know, how do you know how many warblers are flying over King County? You mentioned 88,000 last night, or did she get that wrong?
King County has a website where you can check on every day and see how many birds migrated through during the night, what their altitude was, what basic direction they were going. And, you know, it's basically south to north, but sometimes there's little cants to it. It tells you the peak minute, like last night was, I think I mentioned, was at 12:10 a.m. There were 87,800 flying over. So it gives you that time. And it has the total number of birds when they first started checking for migrants coming through starting March 1st up to the current date. So there's a website that monitors that here for King County and all around North America. Different cities have those. And it's just fascinating to see what's coming through. We had no idea that many of these songbirds migrate by night until the advent of Doppler radar for weather. And then weather people were noticing in the middle of the night these huge clouds going through south to north and realizing, what's a big high pressure system here? There's no condensation, there's no clouds. What's going on? What are we looking at? And they realized it's birds. Hundreds of thousands of migratory birds, like a cloud, moving under night when the air is denser, so it's a little easier flying, fewer predators are around. Most of our raptors that prey on other songbirds are diurnal, day hunters, so night is safer. And again, I mentioned how they use starlight as a navigational aid. That's created some problems with cities that have all of their skyscraper lights on. Birds get caught up in the lights. They're not sure what to do. They exhaust themselves. They might land on the roofs of the buildings, and then the next day they fly and they see what looks to them like a transparent passageway. It's actually a window, and bam, you have a window strike. So Audubon is working with many cities, Denver, Dallas, El Paso, all around the country, to have lights out where they dim the lights in cities to help birds not be pulled off of the star alignment, starlight, to help them guide their way. But yeah, check out the King County Migratory website. It's fascinating every day to see what birds are flying over and how many.
Okay, thank you, Ed. And so I just posted in the chat, somebody else had asked, what is that particular website? The one I'm thinking of is Birdcast. I'm not sure if that's the one you're talking about. But
yeah, I don't have the URL with me right here, but yeah.
Yeah, so Birdcast, and it's actually gives you the opportunity to put in your specific locations and the dates you want to, check the migration. So it is a really good resource that's placed in everyone's hands, so you all can kind of understand what's going on in the bird world. So Britta has a question. Britta saw a Orangecrown warbler in the fill. I imagine she's talking about the Mont Lake fill, last November. Is that unusually late for them?
It was, and I was helping a UW environmental science class by teaching some birding classes there last fall. And guess what? Yeah, I saw Orangecrown warblers there, a couple of them. So yeah, it was unusual. Most of them are gone by Labor Day or mid-September at the latest. And many of us, including the professor teaching the course, were like, whoa, what's an Orangecrown warbler doing here? But there are exceptions to the rule with birds. And as I alluded to earlier, we're not sure why. Maybe that particular individual felt like it didn't have the wherewithal, the strength, or the endurance to make the journey, or perhaps it needed to stay a few extra weeks or months refueling itself. Perhaps the bird suffered an injury and was letting that injury heal. Maybe it had a damaged wing, and so was staying and feeding on what food resources it could find until its wing was healed up well enough to fly off. But you do get some exceptions. And as I mentioned, particularly with the Yellowrumped warblers, and I've also had Townsends warblers over winter in my backyard. I'm not sure why, but something told the bird that, no, it's too dangerous for you to make the journey. And so you do see some unusual anomalies, we would call them, of birds being where you don't expect to find them. But Britta, I believe you, because I saw a couple of Orangecrown warblers in the Mont Lake Fill last October. Yeah.
Okay, so going to combine another couple questions here So where do most warblers nest? And what do they make their nest out of?
Warblers make cup-shaped nests. So they take twigs, branches, mosses, lichens, and weave them together in a small cup, usually in a fork. If you have a fork tree branch coming out, they'll build it right in the Y of the fork, or near the trunk of the tree. As to where in the forest canopy or understory, warblers can be anywhere from 10 feet up to 100 feet up. So they use forest canopy, they use understory, and even down low enough that it's just above eye level. So just depending on the species of warbler and where they find a good tree that has a good structure to build that cup nest in, that's what they do. They build their little cup-shaped nests.
Okay. And what is the best time of day to see different warblers?
Best time of day is in the morning. So if you're an early riser, that's a natural for you. If you're not, you'll have to kind of crowbar yourself out of bed. I would say if you can get out by 6 a.m., you're going to hear and see a lot of warbler activity. 7 a.m., still going to hear and see a lot. 8 a.m., you'll still see and hear a lot. By 9 a.m., it starts to taper off. Most birds taper off by midday. Bird song is an extremely high caloric energy expended activity. So birds don't do it lightly. When you watch a bird sing, their whole body gets into it. It's kind of like, imagine if you were running sprints all day long. Every time a bird sings a song, it's the equivalent of, say, you run a 100-yard dash and you do it over and over and over. You tend to do it in the cool of the morning or the cool of the evening when temperatures aren't as hot, where there's some humidity, and midday you tend to kind of, take it easy on the singing. Depending on the hormone levels in the particular individual bird, it's the hormones that drive all this. So if the hormones are running hot, you can hear Wilson's warblers and Yellowrumped singing midday. But if you really want to get out and hear the maximum number of birds and have the best chance of seeing them, morning and evening, and especially morning, is the best time. The birds wake up, they're full of energy, they're motivated by their hormones, and so they are singing up a storm, and they want to eat too, so they're very active flitting around, and you'll have a great chance to see them as they're getting insects off of the trees. So morning is the best time.
Right. So I think we responded to all the questions in the chat. And so I guess we can go ahead and sign up. But before I, turn it over to Ed to say his final notes on the program, I want to remind you all that beginning tomorrow morning, you can go to either our website right there in the homepage and click the rewind, or you can go to our YouTube page, the Seward Park Audubon YouTube page, and rewatch this program. You can also share it with others and watch it again and again and again. We keep them up until there's no longer a YouTube, I guess. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ed. And for me, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And we'll see you next time.
And I want to say thank you for sharing part of your evening with me. Feel free to rewatch this if you want to review some of the information. I know I gave a lot. Warblers are the most beloved group of migratory birds we have in North America, and everywhere from on the East Coast, Cape May, to the West Coast, everybody's out enjoying and looking at these beautiful jewels that come up from such a great distance to spend a few weeks with us before they head back south. Naturalist Notebook is an installation series that I do 4 or 5 times a year. The next one I'm working on will be woodpeckers of Washington. And we'll talk about how the varied species and colors of these insects and how can they make a living banging your head against a tree all day long and not end up with a concussion. So please check our website, sewardpark.audubon.org. Woodpeckers in Washington will be doing in either August or September. And until then, if you're down at Seward Park on Saturday or Sunday, come by and say hello or join me on an owl prowl or a birding trip or any of the many topics we talk about, because sharing the beauty of nature here at Seward Park is what we're all about, and love to share that with you in person as well as virtual. So Thank you again for joining me. Have a great evening and enjoy our warblers. Good night.